To the 74th meeting of the Economy Committee. Some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf and witnesses will be briefing us via Starleaf. The meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public, and a recording will be made available on the committee's webpage on the Assembly website. The briefing in relation to the Parental Bereavement Leave Bill will be Hansarded as per protocol, and just to remind members to mute their devices when they're not speaking by pressing F4. Leave apologies from Peter.
From Peter, yes, and Claire should be joining.
And Claire will be joining us. And just to highlight to members that this is Jean Barclay's last meeting as part of the committee office team. She's returning to Tourism NI after her year on interchange to the Assembly. So we would just like to wish Jean well and thank her for all the work that she has done over the course of the past year, and wish her well in the future.
Good.
So moving on then to item number 2, which is our draft minutes. There is a copy of the draft minutes from the meeting held on the 29th of September at page 5 of our packs. Are members content that those are an accurate reflection of the meeting?
Content.
And then there is a copy of a draft record of decisions of the meeting held on the 29th at page 14 of our packs. So are members content with those?
Content.
And then just Chair's business, Peter, just wanted to raise, members may have seen in the press yesterday an issue to do with some people's national insurance number when they're applying for the High Street Voucher scheme, saying that it has already been used, and I know I've been contacted by a constituent. Can we just get a little bit of clarification from the department about what the issue is there and steps to resolve it?
Will do, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, just before we move on that, are any members aware of anyone having received the card yet? No? We're just kind of doing a very sort of informal track of when anyone knows one has arrived. There was an anticipation some would arrive maybe either this week or start of next week, but if you do hear, can you just pop it into the WhatsApp so that we're aware? Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. Moving on then to item number 4, which is our briefing from the Skills Strategic Advisory Group. There's a clerk's memo at page 19 of our pack. There is a briefing paper from May 2021 from the Skills Strategic Advisory Group at page 24, a copy of our Skills Micro-Inquiry Report at page 30, and then an updated briefing paper from the Skills Strategic Advisory Group at page 3 of table papers. So just would like to welcome to our meeting this morning Mark Huddleston, who is the Deputy Chair of the Skills Strategic Advisory Group. And if I hand over to yourself, Mark, to make an opening statement, and then we can invite members in for questions.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak to the committee. And apologies from our Chair, Jackie Henry from Deloitte, who's unable to attend this morning. I suppose without going through the papers that we've submitted, the advisory group was created just over a year ago, and we've met fairly consistently through to the start of this summer. We've had 3 significant pieces of work to do alongside our regular work, which was around the 14 to 19 strategy, funding, and most recently on governance for the skills structure. And then we went into abeyance as the consultation occurred. I suppose rather than run through a lot of detail, I just want to highlight 3 particular areas, and they all link to the enablers within the 10X skills strategy. As a group, we believe the objectives of the strategy and the summary of themes that came out of the micro-inquiry are right exactly where they need to be and create a significant springboard for the future. However, around the enablers, we believe there's significant work to do. On the funding front, we've seen funding, and you'll see the details in our papers there that say funding has diminished significantly around our skills system over the last decade. And as an advisory group, we are certainly very concerned about that, particularly as it's linked to the ongoing ring fencing of funding for the primary and post-primary education sector. And there is a significant gap in the outcomes and delivery that our HE and FE organisations deliver in Northern Ireland in comparison to what particularly our post-primary schools deliver. And that's something that was the reason why the 14 to 19 piece was so important to us. Our belief is that we should ensure no child is left behind, and the current education system is not delivering on that, and we see the burden of that then falling on our FE sector. and that is having a perverse impact on innovation, productivity, and wider economic growth here in Northern Ireland. And I think to reinforce that, the decision by our Economy and Finance Ministers back in 2017 not to ring fence the Apprenticeship Levy funding for skills in Northern Ireland has had a significant negative impact, and that has been accentuated by what has happened in the pandemic. Around governance, we only have to look at our nearest neighbours in the Republic of Ireland and Scotland to see the benefit of mature longevity in governance, for which we have not created here in Northern Ireland. The Skills Development Scotland organisation and SkillNet and the National Skills Council in the Republic of Ireland have seen significant benefit in addressing the supply and demand challenges that we face here in Northern Ireland. And there's opportunity for simple reform around areas such as aligning our 11 councils and the local labour market partnerships that are being developed there, work closely with the FE colleges in terms of the remit and the areas the FE colleges serve, so that there is not overlap and duplication of activity. I suppose the most important thing I wanted just to summarise before we could finish, Chair, was around inclusion and how we try to ensure that not only is no child left behind, but from a wider societal perspective, the advisory group wants to ensure that the funding and governance structures enable everyone to participate as fully as they can within their communities and society and within business in Northern Ireland, which is going to have a positive net effect across society here. We have significant sub-regional disparities, and I know, having listened to the committee in the past, that is something that is exercised. The committee, the micro inquiry brought forward key notes around childcare, disability and gender. They're all vital. I know some of those were in our engagement with Minister Dodds at the time were key to her thinking around how the strategy should be developed. And just to flag up two examples of where the committee is, or the advisory group has seen significant work to address that. The Now Group, which is one of our key third sector organisations, has developed the Digital Skills Academy over the last couple of weeks, and that's come to fruition, which is working with our those with neurodiverse needs to allow them to enter the digital and ICT sector in Northern Ireland. It's well documented that those with neurodiverse needs will bring greater levels of creativity and critical thinking and computational thinking to those sort of roles, but are often precluded from them due to their academic pathways that they've had to follow, or just the wider opportunities that fail to be given to those in their neurodiverse community. So that's one example of where the third sector has stepped in to meet some of the needs, and another example would be from the Open University and their micro-credentialing programme, and how that has supported the move that we need into lifelong learning with 12-week degree or postgraduate micro-learning experiences in a online university type experience. And they have offered that alongside the Department for Economy over the last year, and have been growing that before that in areas such as business management, environment and sustainability, and data and technology, working with key partners including the likes of Cisco and Amazon Web Services to develop that. So there is activity going on there that's looking to address that, but we feel that needs to be more coordinated and has to have the right funding, as well as business engagement. There's a challenge to business to properly step up to the mark here, Chair.
Mark, thanks very much for that. And as you indicated in your own comments there, I guess there's a lot of alignment between what you're saying, what we're hearing through the micro inquiry, the skills strategy that went out for consultation, and I think that there's definitely a lot of common ground there to be built upon. The point around the lack of funding is obviously a concerning one. We know that we are facing continued constrained budgets this year, and hopefully we'll get a multi-year budget in the spending review coming down the track. But obviously the loss of EU funding is particularly concerning, and none of us are really, I guess, convinced yet in terms of the replacement that is going to be coming through from the British government. So I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts around the impact of that funding loss. Obviously, European Social Fund in particular has been really important to a lot of that work that you mentioned in your remarks there as well, around inclusion and breaking down barriers to learning and ensuring that young people have those pathways. And I guess that's where there's a concern that there would be a particular shortfall. So I would just be interested to hear your thoughts around that.
Thanks, sure. I suppose that there's three at least things that I would mention. One that I've already mentioned is the Apprenticeship Levy. We have at least 65 million of levy funding leaving Northern Ireland to Treasury each year, and that's been increasing slightly every year since it was introduced in 2017. That money comes back here through Barnett Consequential, but there is a significant comparability added to that. So what should be around an 85 million return to the executive is whittled down. I think this year it's just over 30 million. And that is not ring fenced, that goes into the wider executive pot. And I understand that as we all do, the challenge that the executive faces, but it seems perverse from both a public sector and a private sector perspective that money isn't made available around upskilling and reskilling. A McKinsey report last year noted that at least 60% of people in Northern Ireland are not receiving significant levels of training, and they noted that because of this, the regional dominance and disadvantages for Northern Ireland will be magnified. So the levy is one way. Now, how, and sure, you heard Paul Johnson mention that it was being considered by the Fiscal Commission last week. Whether or not they deem that to be something that can be moved into the fiscal responsibilities for Northern Ireland remains to be seen. But I think there has to be further work done and thought given by the executive to where that money that does come back, limited as it is actually used, and that has been something that has happened in Scotland and to a lesser extent in Wales. The challenges around ESF and ERDF are significant, and I suppose linked to that we look to the rest of the island and we see that the National Skills Fund in the south, and whether there's significant argument as to whether that now has too great a surplus due to COVID or not in it, the fact that that is driving business behaviour to invest in skills. And to a lesser extent in England, the levy has done that as well, maybe not to the way it was intended to, but it certainly has driven a behaviour in businesses in England that have access to levy funds. So those things have to be considered. I think that the final thing is business is prepared to co-invest in this, and it's not about all one way or the other. And I go back to the financial crisis in 2008, and what we're looking for is something that pump primes the system here, that gets our skills system up and running again. It's on its knees right now. And then a model that allows for co-investment, as happened in 2008 when there was training and provision provided at 100% funding, and then that was tapered as business was able to demonstrate capability. That sort of thinking that Dell brought to the table in 2008 is something that we probably need to go back to now.
Thanks for that, Mark. And yeah, the conversation, I suppose, around the apprenticeship levy has been one that has gone on for some time. And I know my understanding was when the levy was introduced in England, there was a cessation of other funding for apprenticeships there, and we lost money in terms of our Barnett Consequential. So I think last year might have been the first year that there actually was a very small amount of resource that was actually available to us in terms of the apprenticeship levy. And as you say, obviously we do have very constrained budgets, but as part of the economic recovery, the skills is, I think, something we all recognise has to be a priority, and funding that is going to be something that the executive does need to look at, I guess, collectively as to how that will be done. I think the piece around businesses co-investing and being willing to do that, I think that type of partnership approach, and we have seen it more so over the past couple of years between business and government working and alongside our academic institutions, and that has been beneficial. And we've seen the relationship as well develop between our further education institutions and our higher education institutions over the past year through the pandemic in a very constructive way as well. And I think those are things that hopefully we can build on as part of the skills strategy going forward. Just, I suppose, I'm just looking at my own notes here. So one of the things, I guess, that the department had mentioned in relation to, and the previous minister, Minister Dodds as well, had highlighted a number of times, was looking at all-age apprenticeships. Is that something you're hearing any further, I guess, progress on being introduced, Mark?
So, Chair, I have been leading the so we have the Strategic Advisory Forum on Apprenticeships and Youth Training that's chaired by Brian Keating. It's been active for 7 years now, since the strategy was introduced in 2014 by Stephen Farry. We have over the summer been working, and there is a business case in front of the department, or was a business case in front of the department for a growth in funding. So myself and Brian Keating, along with the CITB, Road Haulage, Seamus Lee, and the social care sector had presented a proposal for increased funding with the view to it being focused on certain sectors. We understand the challenges the department had on certain sectors getting increased funding and others not. So the business case was presented. I believe the business case was rejected very recently around all-age apprenticeships, which was very disappointing, and it's being rewritten at the moment. Our view was that all-age apprenticeships are needed yesterday. With a significant growth, we've seen the drop in apprenticeship numbers directly related to that. And if we're serious about the outcomes that we state in the objectives of all age, lifelong learning and the opportunities for inclusivity, then all age apprenticeships are a vital mechanism delivering that. So the failure to be able to move in that, and the likeliness is we're going to be unable to move that certainly in this financial year and probably in this mandate. So it's going to roll forward for a long time. And if we just take, and appreciate apprenticeships are not the only thing that's going to address issues like we have in road haulage currently, but to have that apprenticeship pipeline, from an all age perspective started now, gives people the opportunity to reskill and upskill and develop those skills over a period of time, and starts to build that pipeline that we so desperately need in certain sectors at the moment.
Thanks for that, Mark, and that's something that we will go back to the department and ask for some information and clarification around, because it was something that the committee was supportive of as well. And just a final question from myself, and you touched on it there in your remarks. Obviously within the 10X vision strategy, there was a number of sectors that were, I guess, highlighted as potential growth sectors, and I think that's grand, but there are also other sectors that are very important to our economy as well, and ensuring that we have skills within those. You mentioned the care sector, the social care sector, but in terms of ensuring that we do have skills pathways through those I guess maybe more traditional skills, the likes of social care, and also construction trades, those type of pathways. Is there anything that in particular that you think we need to be focusing on in terms of that?
I think there's a number of things, Chair, there. The first thing is to welcome the work being done by the 3 universities and the 6 FE colleges around the tertiary education model that they're trying to develop. I think that's to be welcomed, and any work the department can do to help enable that further will add value. I think the 2 big challenges is the culture that we have, and this isn't just in Northern Ireland, but it's a global challenge around lifelong learning and how we enable and think about that, because retraining is going to have to become the norm. And I suppose certainly the work that previously as Skills Commissioner here with the UK Commission for Employment Skills we did around national occupational standards was to create the opportunity and pathway that there were, as UNESCO and the colleges here in Northern Ireland are working on, and SIA is around transversal skills and how we build those into the core of our curriculum and our learning at all ages and at all stages, and therefore creating the ability to move between sectors and elements of the economy, and while still having that base capability around emotional intelligence, computational thinking, problem solving areas like that there that are needed, whether you're in social care, you're in one of our traditional trades, plumbing, carpentry, or whether you're within the cybersecurity sector and software programming at the leading edge of the economy. Some of those skills are standard and core now, which leads to the key issue that certainly as an advisory group, and for many of us that have been involved in skills for quite some time, is the deep frustration with DE that the 14 to 19 strategy, I know the former minister brought this up last week at committee, and there's another former education minister in the room right now. We are very deeply frustrated, both as a business community and as an advisory group, that there has been failed engagement around 14 to 19 over a persistent period of time. There has been work done and a willingness to participate and develop that, and we haven't seen a change there. And I think until that happens, a lot of the work and the activity, whether the themes in the micro inquiry or elsewhere, are going to be consistently undermined until we get areas like that really addressed. The thinking from business at the moment is that our curriculum in Northern Ireland is pretty good still, and fairly reflective of the wider economic need. The flip side is its delivery, CPD for teaching staff, isn't being put in place to help them develop the capabilities of young people that can move into HE or FE or into the wider world of work. Retaining and forcing young people to stay in work or in education is not necessarily the right way forward. Providing the right work experience opportunities is something we're never going to probably fix. The careers advice. Careers change so rapidly now. So having work experience available that they can taste and understand and get a feel for opportunities that are out there, and also just get that sort of one of the big challenges: will they get the summer jobs and the experience elsewhere? The emphasis in schools is making sure you get A star to C, and that's because that's what they're measured on. The world of work and real life is very different.
Thanks for that. And the work around the 14 to 19 strategy is something that the committee has been focused on. I think we have a briefing with DE on the 20th of October, and certainly we see that as a really important part of the broader skills work, because as you've mentioned yourself, it's that transition from secondary through to tertiary and into work is critical, and we're aware of the duplication and the other issues that there are across our different sectors of the education system. So certainly it's something that's on our radar, and then we'll be continuing to focus on. So I'm going to bring in some other members. Mike, you're first up.
Chair, thank you. Mark, thanks for your engagement. You said the business community reckon the curriculum is pretty good, but if I directed you to the Fair Start report from the expert panel who looked at educational underachievement, when they looked at the relevance and appropriateness of the curriculum, they said that there's a lack of parity of esteem and indeed a lack of understanding between academic and vocational pathways and future job opportunities amongst pupils and parents. And they said that we needed a cultural change recognising the benefits of both academic and vocational pathways. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, as a former CEO of Colleges NI, when it was still in existence, that was something we talked about. What I would say is the curriculum itself, in terms of how it is delivered, is a key challenge. It's a key challenge to those from lower socioeconomic parts of our society. It's a challenge to the teaching staff as to the opportunity they get within the curriculum. And it's a challenge to the business community in terms of how it can deliver. Having those pathways, and if we look at Scotland, Mike, as an example, Scotland enables those vocational educational pathways to commence at 14, and they're expanding that as we speak. So they have what they call the pre-apprenticeship program there, where you can start on those pathways at 14, and they have equal parity. As a parent, I've seen the opportunity that the system can bring. My son has just enrolled in CERC and is seeing the benefit of moving from a classic academic structure to the what they have in terms of the T-learning, transversal learning, and the pedagogy of around problems based. learning and project-based learning. So there's a massive opportunity there. The curriculum stifles and the need to drive towards examination outcomes stifles a lot of the creativity and opportunity and the focus on where the best grade can be gotten. And that is at the core of the challenge. Einstein said, imagination is everything. It's the preview of life's attractions. And what we do is we tend to stifle the imagination and the opportunity and the creativity of our young people. And then that follows through into future learning and future opportunities for them.
Yeah, I must say I agree with you, and you sound like you're in tune with the late Ken Robinson in terms of how formal education can stifle creativity rather than develop it.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. John?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I have to say, it's one of the great mysteries of our administration as to why the 14 to 19 strategy hasn't been delivered yet. It was a priority in my time, and I'm out of education 5 years. And it was a priority before my time. So it is one of those things that I think there's a certain amount of protectionism of various sectors, which needs to be tackled head on. But hopefully we'll have some insight into that in a few weeks' time when we receive the report. Mark, I have certain sympathies with your comment around how we measure success in education. A star to C, and even in terms of Mike's comments around that we stifle imagination and learning, or we can stifle imagination and learning through formal education. And you have to be able to be light on your feet to be able to react to certain and the changing environment. So I agree with you, and I think that there's a cultural change needed, not just in terms of education, but also across our society, that believes that a young person hasn't succeeded if they don't go to university. I think that just has to be, that myth has to be busted right away. There is many pathways through which our young people can succeed and have very successful careers moving forward. But that's on a broader point. I suppose the question I have for you is in terms of the plethora of awarding bodies we have, and they're referred to as the English awarding bodies. It's meaningless as to where they're located. But the colleges have been saying to us in recent times that they would much prefer if they were able to set many of the courses and the awards, that they would be more flexible to the changing economic circumstances and the environment. Have you any views on that?
Thanks, John. First of all, it's a burning platform right now in terms of awarding organisations. We have, you're right, there is a plethora. I think, if I remember rightly, we're touching near 40 sometimes that a college is working with to deliver its various programmes, and that just can't be good value for money proposition. So it can't, whether a single Northern Ireland vocational education awarding organisation is viable, I don't know. I know I've heard the same thing from the colleges, and I certainly understand the principles and what they're trying to achieve there. The rationale behind that is clear. If we take England at the moment, BTEC, national certificates and that activity is being defunded as they move towards T-levels. So what we're seeing is the proliferation of skills from a devolved perspective, where England, Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have their own skill strategies and skill structures as a devolved matter, is leading to proliferation and different routes being taken. And the awarding organisations, whether we like it or not, are commercial entities. Pearson, City and Guilds, etc. They deliver these based on the fact that they can reinvest and grow their own activity. So we have a significant difficulty coming down the line. What and how we deliver that and change that is going to be vital. What I would say is, I think if we don't go down something that is led and controlled by the colleges or has some input from the colleges, then we need to think carefully about the future of SEA as an organisation, because it cannot be both the awarding organisation and the regulator, and that creates an immediate conflict of interest. So that could be the right route forward. I think there are other things. I think the development of, as I mentioned in my comments, the Open University with micro credentials, and City and Guilds are delivering digital badges. whether there will be the same need for the same level as we move to a lifelong learning culture for pure awards. I think that the bottom line is in all of this, the failure of England to maintain national occupational standards in 2016-17, and while the three devolved administrations are still funding that to some extent, there has to be some underpinning level that creates a currency value so that the skills are transferable and the value of those skills is transferable. And whether that is on this island or east-west or more globally is going to be a specific challenge. So if we do create an AO here in Northern Ireland, then the challenge is how do we ensure that the currency of that awarding organisation has the same level of validity as what's being offered by, say, SQA in Scotland or through a T-level programme in England.
I think one of the challenges facing the change in perception is the ability to understand the numerous pathways that are out there. I'm a parent as well of young people who are going through post-primary school at this stage, and they may well take different pathways. All children are different, but I know what an A-level is, and I know what a GCSE is, but see, when you start looking at courses going through further and higher education colleges, it is a minefield. In fact, we had a presentation one day here in the committee, and I left it more confused, and perhaps I'm easily confused before anybody else jumps in. So there has to be a simpler way or refined way of presenting this information to parents and young people so they understand the pathways that are available to them.
Completely agree. I remember one of the first times meeting the chair a number of years ago and trying to describe what FE did, and at 15 minutes in, one of your colleagues said, that's the problem with FE, it takes too long to describe what it does. And this goes back to the initial argument, it shouldn't have to be offering a range of the programmes that it does because it's trying to fix the challenges of what comes out of the education system. And there's no consequence for our post-primary education sector in failing to deliver. So a lot of the level, let's call them level 1, level 2 qualifications, essentially resit and GCSEs to either through essential skills or else is because the school system has failed still over 30% of our learners. Beyond that, yes, and that's where the English T-level structure is trying to rationalise that. My own son's doing an advanced diploma. It was an education to know that there was an ordinary diploma, and the advanced diploma didn't mean anything else other than that it was equivalent to 3 A-levels rather than 2 A-levels. And I think the work that's being done by the 3 universities, and the 6 colleges in the tertiary education group is going to be vital in trying to rationalise that and support that. And the fact that they're now fully engaged and working together will improve and simplify those pathways. And that's vital for business as well, because as we go through and we try to encourage businesses to invest in reskilling, the workforce's understanding those pathways is going to be vital for business also.
Yeah, just one final point, Chair. I think the work between the universities and the colleges is commendable. And I think there'll be a lot of good come out of that. But just my final question is, in terms of cross-border cooperation, where is that in the plan in terms of the skills strategy? When you look at the institutions dotted along both sides of the border, there's benefits there for those border communities.
So all I can say is Jackie, Henry and myself have met and had engagement with Paul Healy, who is the Chief Executive of SkillNet in the Republic of Ireland. That there is significant learning, I think, is the first thing we need to take from the longevity and the structures in the South and how that has benefited and added value both for learners and business. Beyond that, there is more work to be done, and I'm probably not in the right position, but I know the likes of Northwest Regional College and Leo Murphy and Michael McAllister and the guys in Southwest, from a college perspective, are heavily engaged in that activity, and that can only be good for those communities and wider business activity that straddles both sides of the jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thanks, John. Can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Good morning. Thank you for your briefing so far. I suppose one of the areas that concerns me probably the most is tackling economic inactivity and tackling the skills imbalance that we have. and I think one leads to the other as well. But it also is really about policy, other policies, for example, childcare and the barrier that it has for people participating in lifelong learning, but also in the economy as well, and leads to low wage economy. You know, within your consultation and within the report, have you given any detailed emphasis how we kind of combat some of those general policies that we have in the system that is proven, you know, a barrier?
Thanks, Sinead. I think the first thing to say is that from the advisory group perspective, we would generally prefer to see the 10x skills strategy adopted as an executive-wide strategy rather than an individual departmental strategy. Whether that happens or not, you know, it remains to be seen. And our reasoning for that is exactly what you said. If we're going to address those activities, it can't be done in isolation. We need, you know, our health department is the largest skills provider and developer in Northern Ireland. It cannot sit and exist and do that on its own. We need our justice system fully engaged, and I know there is significant work done between the colleges in particular on the Open University with our prison service in terms of restorative justice activities, and there is further work, and I know DFC in particular have significantly come to the table in terms of their activity, but it needs to be a completely joined up approach, and that goes back to some of the challenges that John just alluded to in terms of the clarity of what training offers are available and simplifying those. And then the attitude towards learning as being a young person's activity. I think alongside that, we and this is where, you know, we were pleased that Minister Dodds was you know, emphasising this, and certainly we in our governance paper we wrote this as well, that activities for the proposed Northern Ireland Skills Council and their activities should focus around gender and diversity in the workplace, and also the opportunity given to support that. And that's going to take changes in terms of policy around how we fund lifelong learning, how we enable those that, you know, I met with some college students in CERC recently who are learner returners and are self-funding themselves. It's a significant sacrifice to do that while still trying to maintain family life and employment with no support in terms of any of the support mechanisms that would normally be available from DFC or others. So finding a way to address that within a constrained budgetary cycle is going to be vital. The fact that 31 million has been removed from the skills system in the last decade just speaks to that there, and challenges that, and that's where, you know, all age apprenticeships and other areas can provide the opportunity, and that's where the likes of the OU's micro-credentials can also provide a way of stepping in and out, continuing to build your learning and build credits towards a full qualification that can support you in the workplace.
And the other area that I just want to kind of refer to, you talked about the apprenticeship levy at the very beginning in your opening remarks. Mark, I suppose businesses and they are always prepared to invest in skills, but in many cases businesses feel that they have already invested in the apprenticeship levy, and while the money goes out, it comes back in a very diluted format, and then it's not ring-fenced for the purpose in which it was paid. And, you know, there's a great deal of resentment within the business community in the fact that, you know, there doesn't seem to be that prioritisation within government for the development of skills, because when the money comes in, it could go anywhere really. And that's just the inefficiencies that we have in finance and budgeting here within Northern Ireland. But that is something that is a real problem, because businesses feel that they have been let down in one form or another. And I suppose probably for us to get any kind of confidence into the whole system, is that businesses want to feel that what they pay, that they get it back So whatever form of governance that we put round our skills strategy, it has to be robust, and businesses, and they, need to have faith that their investment will be kept in developing a skills pathway and developing skills, and it doesn't come back in a very diluted manner. And there is always that danger in Northern Ireland that other priorities overtake and the money is allocated elsewhere. So has that been your understanding when you're talking to businesses as well?
Most definitely, right back, over the last 4 years off the levy from day dot, and it's been a persistent noise and challenge. If we take what was and still one of our key industrial businesses here in Northern Ireland in what's now Spirit Aerosystems, was Short Brothers, Bombardier. They at the outset they were spending over £800,000 on levy, and not seeing a penny of that back. That essentially was at that stage their entire training budget leaving the business in levy funds. If we look at from a public sector perspective, Belfast Health and Social Care Trust was spending over £3 million in levy funding and not seeing any of that back. And at the time, I wrote a paper for Minister Hamilton when he was Economy Minister, highlighting the opportunity that if that money was reinvested in porters and auxiliaries, the impact that could have on delivery of frontline services within the health service. So there is significant opportunity, and I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said it's about governance. And that's why we spent time talking to Paul Healy and the guys at SkillNet in the Republic of Ireland. And we've looked very closely at the Scottish model, where they have a structure and essentially a closed loop through Skills Development Scotland in terms of their regional and their sectoral skills investment plans, how that is used to influence learners and individuals in terms of the pathways they take, and then how it's also used to ensure that employers are critically engaged in saying this is a demand we have and these are the programs we need to support that. So matching that, the feedback we got when we presented the outline governance structures to EAG was that they lacked teeth and were just going to be another talking shop again. I know that when you hear from the department, they will probably say otherwise. I think certainly from an advisory group perspective, we would like to see more robust structures. I know there is no desire for another arm's length body here, another Quango, but we need something that is going to be more than just, because business will then fail to engage. It will be there for a while, and then that outcome will dissipate, as has happened around the Strategic Advisory Forum on Apprenticeships and Youth Training. So we need something slightly further. I know we have recommended an independent chair. Whether we go back, and for those that remember, Bill McGuinness, who was the first Skills Commissioner in Northern Ireland, he was also Skills Advisor to the Executive, that sort of level of engagement and investment. We spent, back in 2011, we were spending £1 million a year on skills policy development. We don't spend a penny on skills policy development here in Northern Ireland anymore. That's just crazy.
Crazy. And the other piece that I would just like to raise, and we had numerous stakeholders discuss it when we were doing our micro inquiry, was around careers guidance and careers development. There was a fundamental weakness at that point where children and young people were looking for guidance, and that had a knock-on effect that actually lasted for decades because of the inadequacies in the system. So that has to be a fundamental pillar in developing any skills strategy. And obviously it's again cross departments, and that a governance piece needs to put around that, because you may have very good career guidance in one area and then extremely poor in another area. So there's no consistency in the career guidance, and it came in for a lot of criticism during our engagement in the micro inquiry. How does that feature?
I'm going to probably speak more personally than on top of as vice chair of the advisory group here. Yes, it has. First of all, it has featured, Sinead, and is something that we recognise as a key challenge. And Judith Gillespie, as chair of the Careers Advisory Forum, is a member of the wider advisory group for skills, and we've listened carefully to some of the challenges that she and the members of that advisory forum have had, and even just trying to move forward that level of activity. So we have around careers careers is going to be one of those very difficult areas to fix. In fact, it may be something that we end up pouring more money into and not getting a return from, simply because at the moment, careers, how you define a career, is getting harder and harder. The crossover between what, if we take my sector in terms of manufacturing and the work I'm doing there, and how that is becoming more digitized and automated, and how that's linking closer and closer to what's happening with our software and our cybersecurity and ICT sector. The overlap is so great now that it's very difficult to say this career can be neatly boxed off and said to be with these roles and responsibilities, and this is the path you're taking. On a personal basis, I think the opportunity for more work experience is vital, therefore, that young people can get to see and understand what happens in the workplace, and having more professional, and this is where the challenge is back to the business community. Will they provide those experiences and those opportunities to our young people or learners in general, as they look and seek to select a certain career? There's challenges around insurance and all those things that would need to be addressed, but if we can do that gives a more fulsome understanding of what the world of work is like and what the opportunities are within a particular sector, and are more likely to lead to somebody making the right choices. And again, it goes back to if you have a basis of learning that is based around common skills that are needed across the economy or across sectors, then the opportunity for somebody to move through whether personal circumstances and care needs or through other life-changing requirements is greater and quicker. Careers advice will always form part of that, but it's the one area that actually we have increased our funding in during the last decade and not been able to move the dial on. You're right, there's a challenge because it's cross-departmental, and DFC, DE and DFE are the three key departments there, but I think if there was more opportunity around work experience for young people in those within our whether it's within our HE or FE sectors and through lifelong learning, then the opportunity for them to make the right choices and an informed choice are going to be greater than somebody. The challenge for somebody as a careers advisor to keep up with the pace of change in technology and in the economy now is going to be so great that it's going to be very difficult for them. Businesses having to do that day to day, so why not find a way of enabling them to give the experience to the learner?
And then finally from me, obviously higher education and the provision of higher education, particularly in the Northwest, is a key priority for myself, and I believe for the Northwest region and Derry in particular. Skills imbalances feature very heavily in all of our reports. We have 4,000 higher education places in Derry and we have 40,000 in Belfast. If we're driving a high wage, high productivity and high skill economy, it's very, very difficult to compete in the marketplace for investors to come and set up in the Northwest when our provision is so low. So skills imbalances has to be key in order for us to deliver economic benefit for the whole of Northern Ireland. So, within the strategy and within the consultation, there has to be a key emphasis in how we actually level up here in the Northwest. So, can you talk to can you talk on that, please, in relation to higher education and skill and the balance, skills balance?
The Mazen is a difficult conundrum to crack in our view, and it's a bit like the discussion that was had around corporation tax from a fiscal perspective. Is it the right lever to pull to address some of those skills imbalances? It's going to be one of them. Let's put it that way. Is it the only one? Is it the one that's going to crack that? No. We have to remember that 20% of HE provision comes from our FE sector here in Northern Ireland. So, what are we doing to ensure that the FE sector and the pathways that it is working on are linking to our HE sector? I think the big challenge is how do we create good work that retains those learners and those young people here in, whether it's the Northwest or I'm sure it could be equally said for Fermanagh and South Tyrone as well as it could be for Foyle or the Northwest. It's something that the city and regional growth deals have a potential to start to address. and the delivery of those, I think, not just in terms of the initial capital investment, but then the sustainability of those is going to be critical as to how we move forward. I know there's significant ideas. I've recently had presentations from UU. I met both the Vice Chancellors on Monday, and they're keen to expand and move on those quickly. So we need to get the business case signed off by Department of Finance and move on that, and then enable some very exciting projects to happen. I think we also have to bear in mind is that we're a region that is smaller than Glasgow, and yet we have proliferated and overemphasised certain activities. So how we actually fund this is also going to be vital, Sinead. If we look at what happens in for example, Glasgow, I think from memory there's 3 FE colleges in Glasgow, and I'm sure one of my FE college colleagues would come on here and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that my understanding of the budgeting cycle works there is that where there is the imbalance and where there is a demand cycle needing to be changed, the funding is divided. Even though one of the colleges is quite significantly larger than the other 2, the funding can often be lopsided to one of the smaller colleges. So we maybe need to look at the policy in terms of how the department is funding the different activities to develop that. And that's not just from a DFE perspective. I think that has to be across the executive.
Okay, and Glasgow is a good example. They have about 80,000 higher education students alone in the city, and their economy, the Scottish economy, benefits greatly from the skills provision that they have. But I think this is fundamental to the work that you're doing within the advisory group, because we have to address skills imbalances just as equally as we have to address economic development imbalances. And one goes, they're hand in glove. They have to happen together. One doesn't happen without the other. So it's a big challenge, yes. And Madsen does play a key role. Cross-border cooperation in relation to skills development is another area that we're exploring deeply here in the Northwest, and are talking to the Irish government as well. But it's certainly a key role within this skills strategy, the new skills strategy, and it has to be addressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. Stuart?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate very much the information that you've given us this morning. I guess I'm not making a political point here, but from the sort of high point of investment at the time when Stephen Farry was Minister, we've seen successive falls in investment, and successive ministers and departmental officials perhaps drop the ball is maybe too strong a phrase, but certainly we've seen the focus has moved away from investment in skills and skills strategies over this last number of years, not least of all, I guess, because we've left the EU, because travel and other opportunities are not available, particularly to young people, and the loss of EU funding to the overall budget in Northern Ireland is particularly difficult. Today, I understand we have a Prime Minister that's telling us that we're going to move to a high-wage economy. I think that's more to do with trying to allay people's fears about the cost of their electricity bills this year, rather than the actual reality that we will ever move to a high-wage economy. But where and what are we going to do to invest in those particularly young people, and indeed across all ages, where the skill levels are so low that it is very difficult to attract them into any form of training at all? And how are we going to move our economy forward without engaging that specific group of people?
I think, first of all, on your first points, I was Skills Commissioner during Stephen's time as Minister. I would say there was a perfect storm of activity there, and Dale in its size and flexibility was very different. And I know that the department now is looking at a transformation programme to try and address some of the challenges that it's created. I think the funding cycle has certainly played a big part in that, but I think the biggest piece that that wasn't taken forward over the last decade by all ministers is the governance challenge, and that will start to open up opportunities, Stuart, in terms of how we bring young people back into and re-engage them, and this is why the 14 to 19 strategy is so critical. We see young people usually leaving primary school highly engaged still in core subjects, and within 3 years that disengagement, due to the nature of how the curriculum is presented and the pedagogy that's used, the disengagement becomes significant. There was a pilot done in the middle of the last decade, jointly by D&D, FE/Dale, around merging essential skills learning and maths and English GCSE. And that's seen a significant increase in educational achievement and outcome for those young people, and the pathways that they took were broader. And the same has been seen around the pre-apprenticeship programs in Scotland, where as they study their S5s, they're also getting opportunity to access vocational education from 14. And the benefit of that is that they can see the applied understanding for their core learning around maths and English and some of their sciences work, and how that can impact around whether wider STEM activity within engineering or life science projects, or even linked towards those that are wanting to go into the broader service sector. We have to, and this is a cultural issue, we have to overcome the challenges, and John alluded to those in terms of what the pathways are and how we simplify those. The McKinsey report around reskilling last year highlighted the lack of clarity for suitable training offerings and the simplicity of those training offerings. So how whether that's a branding or a badging activity. I remember when we were developing reviewing the apprenticeships, it was very much, what is the brand that we're putting in this? And that's why a lot of work's been put into the idea behind traineeships as a way forward. And they certainly will create opportunity. I think what we also have to remember is, for a lot of these young people, once they have disengaged, they become extremely disengaged. And how we work at a community level as well as at a wider structure level is very important. We cannot create a one-size-fits-all that says, for argument's sake, FE is the way forward, or we're going to revise how our sixth form colleges operate and that's the way forward. I remember talking to Graham Smith, who was the Scottish Trade Union Congress General Secretary for a long time and still involved in this career structures in Scotland and skills structures in Scotland, talking about how he went into the Parkhead area of Glasgow and was unable to find any young person that he talked to on the street who had actually left that postcode and was prepared to travel across Glasgow to the college which was offering the programmes that were most likely to be of interest to them. I've heard that same story about young people that have been engaged by PwC here in Belfast, and when they went to meet with them, just coming as they were, and at the time to Waterfront Plaza was just something that they'd never been to that part of Belfast before and never wanted to be in that part of Belfast. And that wasn't to do with any political issues. It was just the fact that they were comfortable in the area they were in. So how we support our third sector and make sure that there is a view that our community structures are as equally important and can add value and be a pathway. And whether that means that we narrow what FE offer, and my FE colleagues may end up shouting at me after this, but whether that means level 1 and level 2 qualifications are focused through community structures, and we have pathways that start to present opportunity in terms of, as we go back to experience in the workplace, and then that leads to level 3 and level 4 opportunities within the FE, and level 5 and level 6 opportunities within FE and HE. The pathways need to be there that will enable that. So that comes back to the governance structures, it comes back to funding, and it comes back to a realisation that we need an ecosystem of various entities that will work together and will fit the various parts of the jigsaw to make that work.
Yeah. And just finally, in talking to representatives from NRC this year, when they were conducting interviews for young people looking to move from school at the 14 to 19 age group, moving from school to alternative higher education. One of the things that they commented on was the higher number of young people that were coming to them for interviews, online interviews this year, because they weren't being blocked by careers teachers. careers teachers quite simply not pointing young people towards FE colleges. I find that a shameful situation, that some schools value their performance in getting A's and A stars over actually directing young people in their lives towards the best possible education that they can have going forward. We urgently need the 14 to 19 strategy, and we need a great deal more flexibility in our whole wide education system, and that people shouldn't be boxed into a particular type of career path just because of the school that they've chosen to go to, or their parents have insisted that they go to.
Wholeheartedly agree, Stuart. Now, and John O'Dowd will remember the Apsley report that he commissioned. John, I'm going to say 2015, if my memory serves me right. That reported just around the time you were finishing in education. One of the recommendations from that was to scrap GCSEs. Now, that's a fairly radical outcome, but I think it has to be on the table. We have to consider all options here. Again, another mechanism goes back to the governance of schools. Is the governance of schools fit for purpose? Because you've highlighted a key challenge. Schools have a vested interest in ensuring that 4,500 or whatever it is now goes to them rather than to an FE college for a learner staying on to do A levels. It may be deemed to be slightly unfair, but I think it would be remiss of me not to say that some schools are essentially now exam factories, looking to ensure that they appear well up the league tables in the Belfast Telegraph whenever they're published. And that's a personal view rather than an advisory group view. The outcome that we're looking for here, it may have to be that the funding mechanism has changed, that money goes not directly to the learner, but if we take the likes of Singapore, where that money is in a pot for the learner to use as appropriate, because it's about lifelong learning now. Absolutely. Coming out with 8 or 9 good GCSEs, and then 2 or 3 A levels and a degree, and then having a job for life is long gone. And it will never return. Even if you go into a particular sector, the reskilling within that sector and the development of that sector is going to be transformational. And that doesn't matter whether you decide to go down a classic route to become a solicitor or a lawyer, or a doctor or a dentist, or you go into one of the new pathways around cybersecurity and fintech and all those things. So the view and the change has to be radical here. Society and business and activity and the pandemic has demonstrated that even more, has changed rapidly, and that pace of change is going to only increase rather than decrease. Our education system as a whole must be able to respond to that, and it's great to see that our FE and HE colleges and universities are endeavouring to do that. We now need that to be matched within the wider education system.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stuart. Keith?
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mark, for your information so far. Mark, my question, and John sort of touched on it earlier, obviously pathways regarding academic and vocational. How do you see the young women and women increasing numbers go down the vocational route? And I'm talking about trades, and I'm talking about engineering, and I'm referring to hands-on engineering, not necessarily paper-based engineering. How do you see that being improved and developed, and that young women increasingly going that route?
It's vital. If I take what's my main day job at the moment, I'm Joint Chief Executive of the Makers Alliance, and one of the things we're working with Stephen Kelly and the guys manufacturing an eye on is sector attractiveness and that opportunity. And I suppose this goes back to one of the welcome activities that Minister Dodds put in front of the advisory group was to ensure that gender and diversity in the workplace were being addressed. I think the first thing is, from a sector perspective, we have to highlight the fact that engineering and manufacturing in general is a significantly different environment and experience than what it was even just a decade ago. There is a massive need to bring the thinking processes and experiences that a wider sector, and whether this is it goes back to either neurodiversity or whether it's about gender, we can apply that to various regions. How that's delivered and achieved, I think again goes back to how we teach, how we present the opportunity, and the fact that these sectors now deliver and are requiring a wide range of skills in different means than they previously had. It is not about manual labour, about physical lifting. If I take my own experience recently, we worked in a business that was heavily chemical activity orientated, and therefore not necessarily had been the most pleasant experience to work in. But we're moving from chemists who had to physically take samples from these chemical vats to it being automated and the data, and it was more about data analytics and being able to review that information. And therefore, the opportunity and the challenge was to sell that to a wider sector and create the greater opportunity. And that's going to, being able to develop those ideas around good work and high performing working practices here in Northern Ireland is going to be critical around that, how business interacts. And that's why I'm saying it's as much about work experience now than careers advice, because once you get somebody into the workplace and they can see the difference in the opportunity and how that can impact society as a whole, it is transformational in comparison to getting some dry careers advice.
What's your thoughts on creating an incentive for businesses, engineering, manufacturing, whatever, take on women? What's your thoughts on that without being, controversial on it? What's your thoughts on taking a percentage of women or giving opportunities to women more so to break that stigma that it's a male-dominated sector?
That's a difficult one to crack. I think I can only speak from personal experience here. So in offering apprenticeships, for example, we were very clear that the apprenticeship pathway created a wide range of opportunities. I think business views of how they enable women to return to the workplace, maybe after having a family or caring responsibilities, is also going to be vital. So that wide range of high performing working practices that say that we are a good employer. Now, whether that is through something like Investors in People accreditation or something else, is a potential means forward. Beyond that, I think it's going to come down to as much about policy and support as it is to how business interacts. And this is where the governance structures are going to be vital. If we can get the governance structures right, where business and our training providers and government, local government or devolved government are engaging and interacting, that's going to be as vital as it is about maybe creating incentives. Often incentives end up having unintended consequences, and it's difficult to find. I know even just as we were trying to consider incentives to increase apprenticeship activity in Northern Ireland, it was very difficult to find something that could be done there on the basis that we have very few fiscal levers to pull, and it may be something that the new governance structures here engage with the fiscal commission around, saying there's maybe opportunity to do something here. What that would look like or how that would work, whether through a national insurance rebate or something else, remains to be seen.
And just one final question, if I may, Jared, just regarding, you touched on work experience, obviously young people in school, whatever, third, fourth year, as I refer to. Is that working? Because sometimes it seems to be a week off or a week out, excuse the terminology, and schools are not steering the children in the right direction. And, somebody referred to it as an exam factory, whatever. Young people, some people, to be fair, some young people know where they're going and the preferred idea of what direction they want, and then they need that work experience to sort of cement that and give them a good stay. Others don't. But it's just find somewhere, get out for the work experience, you've ticked the box, but it's really no benefit to them or anybody or industry. How would you see that being improved? And that we're probably going back into the school sector, at that point in life.
There's an element of the school sector, there's an element of how business approaches that as well. Business needs to make sure that it's providing a quality work experience, and some businesses do that very, very well, and others not so good. And if we take Mid-Ulster, the mega project, they're certainly looking to coordinate and develop that work experience as well as the sector attractiveness piece, and the two go hand in hand. The schools have a part to play in this, but the school, because careers is let's say the Cinderella part, along with learning for life and work within a school, rather than being seen as a key element of school activity, it's always going to be difficult there. So I think that the onus falls on business to find a mechanism and a structure to support that, and that goes back to the governance piece. How do we enable employers to provide a quality work experience, and doing that is going to have to be done, whether that's done through some sort of central mechanism or whether that's done through some standardization, that there's certain things that you have to do to be able to provide work experience, and whether that, as you mentioned earlier, that becomes an incentive or there's some other way of recognizing that within those businesses is going to be vital. So it's going to be a hard nut to crack, but I think it's going to be a critical one if we're going to enable all our young people and ensure that there's no child left behind, and social inclusion and opportunities there for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mark, thank you very... Oh, sorry, Stephen. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mark, for your presentation, and certainly I would commend your work of yourself and your colleagues on the advisory group. I think your presentation today highlights your in-depth knowledge and skills in this subject. Just a couple of questions. As part of the micro-inquiry that this committee was involved with over the last number of years, one of the themes was basically that there's too many students graduating in the arts and teaching. That was contained within it. Is that something you believe is the case in terms of the traditional, I suppose, what they're known as arts, humanities and social sciences? Is that something that you would concur with?
It depends on how you view how our economy is going to grow and develop, and it goes back to, if you're creating the core skills or the transversal skills as UNESCO describes them, then having that as a basis, then where you end up majoring, let's call it, within your HE career is going to matter less potentially than more. Yes, we have an oversupply of teachers right now. Could that, if that was changed, help develop CPD within our current teaching community so that they can more thoroughly and accurately reflect, and deliver the breadth of the curriculum as well as the elements that are chosen within schools at the moment is arguable or remains to be seen. The need potentially is to look at where and get better information and evidence as to where the economy is going, rather than saying right now we need less of this and more of that. At the moment, unfortunately in Northern Ireland, a lot of that is very much finger in the air type activity. The skills barometer is due to be published again here, I believe, this side of Christmas, and I think that will again start to give it a key indicator. The flip side of that is then, how do you fund the change? Because an arts degree is a lot less costly in terms of classroom time, lecture time and activity than a STEM degree, where there is significantly more CPD required for the lecturer and the tutor, and there's a significantly higher investment in the technology that's needed to support and deliver that in terms of capital equipment, etc. So we have to go around the full loop and look at all the different pieces here. It's more nuanced than apologies. It's not a clear yes or no answer. What I would say is there is opportunity to address that in various forms without having to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Just leading on to that question, then obviously our growth sectors, have you mentioned IT, fintech, cybersecurity, and so on. Has the number of courses being provided by further and higher education increased in line with the growth of these sectors? And has your group had any discussions with these, with further and higher, in terms of making sure the courses are there to meet the where the growth sector ultimately is?
If you were to talk to our fast-growing software, ICT, cybersecurity sector here in Northern Ireland, I think a lot of those guys would say that we haven't maybe grown that as quickly as we should. If we take, let's say my background in manufacturing, we probably still have an oversupply of very specialist engineers against more generic engineers. And it goes back to what I said earlier at the start in the opening comments, is that the overlap between these sectors is growing. So the overlap between our agri-food and agri-tech sector and our digital sector is narrowing as one example, as we try and drive productivity within our agri-food sector. So what I would say is there is work to be done there. I chair the Matrix subgroup that will be reporting on the future high-tech workforce skills needs for Northern Ireland, and we have another workshop on that next week, and hopefully that report will also publish before Christmas. And from a Matrix perspective, that hopefully will inform policy activity within DFE and our HE and FE sector in terms of where they develop those skills. The challenge we have is it's so fast moving now that it's very difficult to maintain that. The half-life of technology, was being measured in days and weeks. I think we've stopped measuring the half-life of technology in terms of the speed that it's moving forward now. So there is significant challenge in terms of how we are flexible in our approach and response there, and that's where the change in face of qualifications towards micro-credentials and the need for lifelong learning, and that what the strategy calls a digital spine is going to be so critical, because that digital spine will cut across all those sectors that you've mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Just briefly then, obviously you touched upon the GCSE, I suppose your comment just about that, about results and so on. I just think it is worth pointing out in terms of the A-level results this year, despite the 18 months which students have had, is 2.3% increase from last year in the number of students achieving the A-star grade. 15.8% of students achieved the A-star grade at A-levels this year. So obviously, it's a huge discussion that in around, how our examination process works. But certainly there is still, there's such an important part of learning and obviously and development. Just in terms of quite rightly a big focus on the 14 to 19 strategy. Obviously, with your background and the work that you're involved with, do you think that careers guidance, some sort of light careers guidance, should be extended even into the primary school sector?
I think that there's certainly the opportunity to give an understanding of opportunities there, and maybe break down at that early stage some of the role model type scenarios that sees a career at early stage as being a particular community or particular sector, a particular person to go into. So yes would be my initial response. How you deliver that would need to be carefully coordinated with something that followed the whole way through, and was an opportunity. I think if we go back to the strategy and the piece around the digital spine, introducing that as early as possible and growing that activity in the primary sector would be a really good launch pad and a starting point for delivering some of that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Stephen. Mark, thank you very much for your time and for your contribution. It's been very, very useful to us, and Peter has taken note of a number of issues for us to raise back with the department, and I'm sure we'll be continuing to engage with yourself as well as the skills strategy progresses. So thanks for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, buddy.
Do we need to pick up on anything?
Chair, there's a number of bits of information I'll check up with the department if members are content, but also there are a lot of mentions of places and boards and so on, both particularly in Scotland and down south, that if members are content, I'd like to get more information on and potentially get contact. And I think there's probably some interesting aspects of policy that they could come and talk to us about, if not in formal committee briefings, certainly in informal briefings. And I think it would be useful to try and gather that information. There's clearly systems out there that work well, and it might be useful to hear how they work well.
Yep.
So if members are content, we'll gather all that together and bring it back. Obviously, we have the concurrent meeting with the Education Committee on the 20th, specifically around 14 to 19. And it'll be useful to basically be able to bring a lot of this information into that as well, so that the Education Committee can sort of see the angle that this committee is coming from. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so if members are happy enough, then we'll move on to our next item, which is our briefing from the Department on the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. This briefing will be hand-started as is per protocol, and just to highlight to members that agenda numbers 5 and 7 are associated with today's this briefing. So there are a number of papers at item 7 in your pack. There's a clerk's memo at page 67, a response from the Minister to issues raised by the committee in relation to the bill at page 69. a departmental response to the queries raised by the Human Rights Commission at page 94, a copy of the Delegated Powers Memorandum at page 95, a summary of the written responses following the call for evidence at page 102, and a summary of additional comments raised as part of the committee's survey responses at page 109, a copy of the admissibility criteria for amendments to a bill at page 128. The papers include a detailed response from the Minister and the Department to the issues raised in the written and oral evidence and in committee discussions, as well as a response to the scrutiny points in the RAISE research paper. The Minister, in his letter at page 69 of the pack, draws attention to the issues of extending provisions to miscarriage, the day one right to pay, and the ability to take leave in single days rather than the proposed week-long blocks. The Minister states that whilst it is ultimately for the Assembly to determine where the bill to be amended to reflect any or all of the above, the effect would be the same, namely it wouldn't be possible to make provision for parental bereavement leave and pay in this mandate, and the most likely introduction date for secondary legislation would be the April 2023. The Minister outlines the reasons as the potential cost that may require the bill to be referred back for further executive consideration and approval. Secondly, the departmental officials have been advised by HMRC that in order to make the requisite changes to reflect and accommodate the amendments, system development, lead-in times and other considerations such as payroll software development would render an April 2022 introduction date impossible. In his letter, the Minister highlights that the latest HMRC estimate for including these issues within the bill would be around 2.9 million, a considerable increase from the original working estimate. However, in his letter, the Minister suggests that these issues could be explored as part of a forthcoming employment rights bill in the next mandate. So this is the committee's opportunity to explore all of these issues with officials and for us to discuss those out. So if I could just welcome to the meeting this morning Colin Jack, who is Director of Business and Employment Regulation in DFE, Kelly Sprott, who is Employment Relations Policy and Legislation in DFE, and Lawrence Rogers, who is Employment Relations in DFE. And if I invite you to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members for questions.
Okay. It's Colin Jack. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting us today to give evidence. Kelly and Lawrence are part of the bill team on the parental bereavement leave and pay bill, I mean, as you outlined, Chair, we've been following the committee's scrutiny of the bill so far very closely. We've listened with interest to the evidence that you've taken from various witnesses as a result, and I suppose in response to the various pieces of correspondence that we've received from the committee, the bill team has undertaken further detailed analysis on those issues that attracted greatest attention at the second stage debate and so far during the committee sessions. And as you mentioned, Chair, the Minister wrote on the 1st of October outlining his thoughts on those issues. So, I mean, I don't have very much more to say by way of introductory remarks. We'll be happy to consider questions from the committee and answer them as best we can.
Okay, well, look, thank you for that. And I guess if I just go to the Minister's letter to us first of all. Sorry if I can just grab my copy of it here. I suppose just to refer to the issues that have been raised with us and the evidence in particular from Human Rights Commission and others in relation to what the implications of the provisions would mean in terms of rights and other issues. And one of the issues, I guess, that we have considered in detail so far, and which is referred to in the Minister's letter, is that issue of it becoming a day one right. And the Minister has outlined in his letter the suggestion that that would have both cost implications and also time implications. So it was just, if you could talk us through that in a bit more detail, about the complexity of the issue that would raise. And then the other things are, I guess, the inclusion of miscarriage leave, and how the leave might be then taken. So maybe if we could just talk through, first of all, the issue of making it a day one right and what the implications of that are.
Okay, I mean, in terms of the day one right, the bill as drafted obviously provides for a qualifying period of 26 weeks, which is common with many employment-related payments like this, for paternity leave, maternity leave, and so on. The system that HMRC operate is based on the entitlement to parental bereavement leave and pay that has been introduced in GB. If the Assembly was to decide to do anything different, HMRC would require payment from the Executive for any separately identifiable costs of making a change. Now, those costs are largely for changes to the IT systems underpinning parental bereavement leave and pay, and HMRC, we've had significant engagement with them on all the proposed changes that have been suggested in the consultation exercise, and I suppose were raised in the second stage debate and those who've given evidence to the committee so far. The cost really of making this change, the latest estimate we've received, and it is still a preliminary estimate, but it's £1.5 million to make that change. Now, if we think about the cost of the actual parental bereavement pay that is likely to be incurred by the Executive each year, we estimate the total bill on the current entitlement basis as about £100,000. And if we estimate the proportion of potential applicants who might be in this position of being in their first 6 months with a new employer or not having served 6 months with an employer, our estimate is that perhaps a maximum of 40 parents a year would be likely to be brought into the scope of the pay. So it really is, I think, the cost of 1.5 million that is just, it would be very difficult to justify that cost given the size of the payment that would be, which would be somewhere around probably £11,000 or £12,000.
Okay, so I guess that's a one-off cost, however, for the system development, and then that would be in place year on year for those additional estimated 40 parents per year, I assume that would be?
It's a one-off cost for the systems development, but it also includes maintenance for a 5-year period. So, it would be a cost to cover a 5-year period.
So I guess it's a case of balancing what would be provision of a really important support for those individuals at a really difficult time in their life against what the cost would be to introduce that and have it in place for those people that need it. And I guess in the grand scheme of budgets, 1.5 million doesn't seem particularly huge. And obviously that's for people to consider. The miscarriage leave, as I understand it, could also be included in the system preparation and maintenance in that £1.5 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The cost for making that change, if it were to be made in terms of the HMRC changes, would be a similar figure to the cost for making parental bereavement pay a day one right. I suppose the difference there is that introducing miscarriage into the entitlement for the pay is that there are a lot more parents who unfortunately experience miscarriage in a year than are in the scope of the bereavement pay. I mean, the latest estimate is that around 236 a year under 18 die in Northern Ireland. The estimate in terms of the prevalence or how often miscarriages take place range between 1 in 8 of all pregnancies and 1 in 4 according to some estimates. So the cost of that payment in itself could be anything between a few $100,000 and perhaps 3 million. I think is the highest estimate of the cost of that. So it would be a very significant increase in the scope of the payment that is in the bill, as I suppose was agreed by the executive for tabling at the Assembly. Kelly, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add to that.
No, I mean, I think you've covered the issues well with regard to miscarriage. The only thing to say that obviously the recurring costs each year would be significantly higher, as Colin has intimated, but more than that, there are lots of complexities to consider when thinking about including miscarriage, not least with regard to is it miscarriages that are known about? How would people inform their businesses? Would it be self-declaration? There are a lot of considerations that need to be taken on board, which were not part of the consultation. So we would need to consult on this to actually get the right answer. What provision would be the right correct amount of time? This bill is for parental bereavement and is allowing for 10 days. Is 10 days correct for miscarriage? We've all seen the very high profile state in Northern Ireland, in New Zealand, which is allowing for 3 days. So none of those things have been considered as yet, so that we could actually find the right answer for provision for miscarriage in Northern Ireland.
I mean, I suppose just one thing to add is that clearly the issue of miscarriage leave and pay has been put up the agenda by the introduction of the 3-day entitlement in New Zealand since this bill was first introduced, and that is attracting attention at Westminster as well as here. So I mean, it may well be there is further debate on this issue over the next year or two, which could lead to developments elsewhere. I think one of the difficulties we have in terms of the arrangements with HMRC is that if we in Northern Ireland plough our own furrow on these family-related leave entitlements, we get a lot of the cost for development of the systems falling on the executive. When we, I suppose, follow or move in tandem with entitlements that are being introduced in GB, we don't incur the same implementation costs with HMRC.
Yeah, so we have employment evolved and have the ability to set our own agenda, but the cost becomes as a barrier to the actual introduction of progressive employment policy. I guess that is something worth reflecting on. And has this been in any way explored if the executive and the Assembly was minded to move ahead with either the introduction of miscarriage leave or the making of it right, and those changes were, and in particular the changes in relation to miscarriage, because that's where the discussion is around, were to be introduced by Westminster, would those costs be refunded?
I mean, I suppose that would be a matter for the executive to discuss with the UK government. if that were to happen. I mean, certainly we've had no discussions to date on that issue.
Okay. And you see, in relation to the suggestion that this could be taken forward within a departmental review of employment law, where is that sitting with in terms of departmental priorities currently? And obviously you would be looking towards the next mandate, and therefore it could be you know, at a different level of priority for an incoming minister. And like, we already know that there is significant interest in the issue of legislating for miscarriage leave. So is the department looking at consulting on that any time in the near future?
Well, there are a range of issues on employment law where work has been taken forward over the last, I suppose, 5 years by the department in London, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. You know, we have things like the Matthew Taylor review of good work, and because we didn't have an assembly and ministers for 3 years, to you know, to do preparatory work in Northern Ireland in that period, and then since devolution was restored early last year, we've had obviously COVID-19 to deal with, but also a very limited time to bring primary legislation through the Assembly. I think it would be fair to say some of the actual enactment of policy announcements in GB into legislation, though, has taken longer than you know, one might have expected, and so a lot of the changes that are likely to happen in GB will form part of an employment bill which has been announced by the UK government, but the precise timing hasn't been announced. So you know, there's a whole range of issues that, you know, ministers will need to look at in the future. And you know, it's quite possible those will lead to a bill in the next Assembly term. We'll need to consult on those issues, and I suppose whatever issues an incoming minister would want to look at after the next Assembly election. But certainly, you know, the department is doing some preparatory work in the background so that we would be in a position to consult on issues, and certainly anything that's raised in the context of this bill would be fed into that process.
Okay, that's useful to know. I'm going to bring in some other members. Mike, you're first up.
Chair, thank you. I'm not at all sure how members of the committee feel about measuring rights and entitlements through the prism of finances only. And I have to say, when I heard the figure of 1.5 million mentioned, my first thought was what we heard last week, which was that the department's holding back 21 million in case of an overspend on the High Street stimulus scheme. However, Colin, if I understand the Minister's letter correctly, we basically have a choice here. Support the legislation as drafted, and it becomes operational in April of next year, and those who qualify will benefit from that point on. Alternatively, dig in over the likes of miscarriage and day one rights, and that will result in nobody getting anything for another 12 months. It would be April 2023 before we could have an operational act. So that's the choice as I see it. Would that be a correct interpretation?
I'll ask Kelly to come in a moment. I mean, my understanding is it may be possible to introduce, you know, the legislation as drafted from April 22, but that if there were any changes to the policy, it certainly wouldn't be possible to bring any of those in before April 23. And indeed, in our most recent discussion with the HMRC, there were some of them that they said would take until April, you know, we would be too late even now to bring them in for April 23, so it would be April 24. But Kelly, is my understanding correct on that?
Yeah, yes, that's accurate. It depends on what the amendments are proposed for the bill and what is written in the bill. But certainly, if the will of the Assembly was that some form of parental bereavement leave and pay entitlement was to come in April 22, that could be done as is drafted, depending on the amendments, and the amendments could follow later if they were drafted in that way. But Colin is right. Our most recent discussions with HMRC, they have asked us to ensure that we articulate to the committee that April 23 is by no means guaranteed. They have high-level strategic projects that they have ongoing with UK government as well, and they cannot guarantee that they would be able to introduce any of our proposed amendments by April 23 at this stage for us. So it's important you're aware of that.
Okay, thank you. In terms of a further departmental review, would that include looking at the call from the Coalition of Bereaved Workers for similar rights to be extended to those who have lost close relatives and partners?
I mean, that would be very much up to an incoming minister, but certainly, any issue that has been raised in the context of this bill, I think is something that it would be incumbent on us as officials to, to feed into the development work that we would be doing for future employment legislation.
And would you have, you mentioned the fact you had 3 years without a minister to give you direction, Colin. Would you have spent that time drawing up a list of issues?
Well, there are issues that are on the record as having been considered in GB. There's a good work plan that was written by Matthew Taylor, or at least the UK government developed following the report by Matthew Taylor. Those issues are largely about employment rights in terms of people in precarious employment situations. So a lot of the focus is there, but there are other issues that there have been UK government announcements about, like carers leave, for example, that we would be feeding in as well. A lot of it is about catching up with the position in GB, but certainly if there are issues that the Assembly wants us to look at, we will look at them. There clearly this issue of if we do anything differently in terms of entitlements to paid leave, there's a cost, in terms of the administration by HMRC. That's a factor we would have to, bring to everyone's attention. But certainly it's possible to consider any issue the Assembly wants us to look at.
A final question. Are there any issues that are particular to Northern Ireland in this area?
Not that we're particularly aware of. Kelly, no.
No.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike. And Kelly, can I just go back to the question that Mike asked around the introduction of amendments? So, is it a case that the bill could be operational as it is from April 2022, but that amendments could be made to it to come in to effect post-date that once it was possible to enact them?
Yeah.
Once the machinery was there to enact them?
Sorry, I can hear someone saying yes. Is it me you've addressed the question to?
Yes, Kelly, you.
Yeah, okay, thanks, sorry. That's my understanding, Chair. I would, if you don't mind, like to, after this meeting, just take OLC, Office of Legislative Counsel view on that, if you don't mind, but that is my understanding, that depending on how the amendment would be worded, it would still be possible to bring, level up the rights, as in bring parental bereavement leave and pay into Northern Ireland in April 22, akin to that has been in GB since 2020, and then do the work that was necessary, with HMRC to change their systems and their online forms to accommodate some of the potential amendments that the committee is talking about, and they would come forward at a later date. But my understanding is it all depends on how the amendment is worded, but I'd like to check that out with legal colleagues, if that's okay.
Yes, that would be very helpful, Kelly, and that I guess is something the committee would be keen to explore if it was possible. So if you would be happy to share that with us once you would have that response, that would be very useful. Stuart?
Okay, yes.
Sorry, Chair, yes, it was me that was saying yes because it seems to me to be a sensible way to move this forward in relation to developing the legislation. And if we can do this as a sort of a multi-part piece of legislation, so we do not fail those who have been bereaved under the initial intent of the legislation, but that we can, if it's the mind of the committee and indeed ultimately the mind of the Assembly, that we add the additional elements in relation to the single days and also in relation to miscarriage. Then I think that would be a very good place for us to be in. You've told us the costs in relation to HMRC. Thank you for that information. But it's now information which I personally, I think many people will then simply wish to discount because we know how much money is squandered and wasted in the public sector in Northern Ireland. We know how much money is handed back on an annual basis. And the price of delivering this going forward over a number of years is of immeasurable value to the health and well-being of many, many people going forward in delivering this piece of legislation. Certainly in relation to should the rest of the United Kingdom wish to play catch up with us in respect of this, I think we certainly should be sending the bill for our share of the development of the work from HMRC, and that's an element that we should be pursuing with them. I think the reality is that we've now extracted from you the information that it is possible to move forward in this direction. I think you will find that the committee will want to work collaboratively with you to deliver that. So we look forward to you working at pace now to bring back the appropriate framing of how that can be achieved so that we can enter into a phased process that will deliver over the next number of years, but specifically not to miss the target for at least element one of what now looks to be possibly a three-step process. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thanks, Stuart. I think Sinead is wanting to come in. Can we bring Sinead into the spotlight, please?
Thank you very much for your update this morning. It's disappointing. I think all members of the committee will be disappointed to learn that we can't move forward in a more robust piece of legislation. But I would echo what Stuart has said. It's important that we do move forward rather than, pause at this particular stage. I just wanted to come in and kind of back the sentiments that have been expressed. But it is disappointing because we wanted to lead the way here in Northern Ireland, that others might follow us in this legislation. But all's not over yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. I don't have anybody else coming in for questions.
Chair, so what we'll do now is I've asked our Bill Clerk to come down, so we move into closed session to seek advice on how or if the committee would amend in the context that's been described in terms of making an amendment that would then be delayed in coming into effect. So if we go into closed session now.
Okay.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Okay, so members, we're back in live session now, and what we just want to ask members is that we seek agreement to bring forward some options on amending the bill.
Yes, Chair. So we'll draft an amendments options paper, which will also include, beyond amendment, potentially recommendations in a bill report, etc. And that'll lay out for members all the different ways that they can progress what they wish to progress. And we'll have that for next week's meeting.
Okay, thank you. So moving on then to our next item, which is our matters arising, which is item number 6. There, item number 6.1 at page 57 of our packs, there's a copy of an update from the Minister on the Higher Education Cheating Services Prohibition Bill. The Department for Education in England has advised the Department here that rather than taking forward the standalone private members bill, i.e. the Higher Education Cheating Services Prohibition Bill, they now intend to include the provisions in the broader Skills and Post-16 Education Bill. Due to timings with the introduction of the bill, there is no scope for amendments which would extend the provisions of the bill to the devolved administrations. So the Minister will no longer be progressing his request for a legislative consent motion in relation to the bill. So that's just for members to note. Then,
Has the department indicated whether they plan to bring forward any legislation, or would be the next mandate?
The original letter we had from the Minister around this had indicated that the department was looking at bringing forward legislation, but that wouldn't be possible within this mandate. So they'll continue to look at that, monitor what's being done in GB, and I suppose the handy thing at the end of the day is if Westminster's legislated first, then you've got a model that they may well then be able to shortcut into legislation should the Assembly want to do that, but that will definitely be next mandate. There's really no opportunity to do that now.
okay, thank you. So moving on then to 6.2, at page 58 of our pack, there is a departmental response regarding some committee queries on the High Street Voucher scheme. In relation to whether the phone line application service can be implemented earlier to coincide with the opening date for online applications, well, obviously that has moved on. The department advises that the delay was to encourage applicants to use the online portal service first, as it is faster, cheaper, and ensures applicants are responsible for inputting their own personal information. The department don't want the phone line to come under pressure, leading to poor quality phone service. And then secondly, with regards to the lateness of the completion of the equality impact assessment, the department advises this could not be completed until all key policy decisions had been taken by the Minister. So the response contains a comprehensive overview of the media campaign that the department is implementing also. And just to highlight to members, Tommy O'Reilly, who had been working on the High Street Voucher scheme, is finishing up, I think, at the end of this week. And just to thank Tommy for his engagement with the committee over the past number of weeks and months on it.
Sure. In terms of the Equality Impact Assessment, guidance from the Equality Commission states that equality impact assessment should be part of the decision-making process, not at the end of the decision-making process. So they should form part of your decision-making process. You shouldn't simply carry the equality impact assessment once you've made a decision.
Chair, I think absolutely, and I think what the department is hinting at there is that not all policy had been pinned down. What I mean by that is there was a policy, but it sounds like there was then a rethink on the policy, and that's led to this delay. Now, that's purely me trying to fill in the gaps there, but absolutely what Mr. O'Dowd has said is the case. And we can ask more questions on that if members are willing.
I could really write the response now.
Keep it short, sir. Couldn't do that. Well, no, Chair, it's a matter. We can...
Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not surprised at the responses there, because this seems to be like policy done on the hop. In and around all of this, it was developing right up until the very, very last minute of nearly just before lunch. I certainly, you don't dovetail a quality assessment at the end of anything. It should be front and foremost for any type of policy that it reaches out to everybody. And that's totally unsatisfactory, and I think it really does expose the poor policy making in and around all of this to do with the High Street Voucher scheme.
Chair, what I would suggest is we put a request into the Dallow readout for an expansion on that answer, because I don't think that answer does the department great justice. And I think it's probably more nuanced than that. Far be it from me to come to the department's rescue, but I just don't think they've actually responded in a very fulsome and appropriate way.
Okay, members content to do that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chair, can I come in?
Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Hi, it's maybe not particularly related to this point, but a number of constituents has raised with me issues in relation to national insurance numbers related to the scheme being already used whenever they get an application. Now, they've since come back to me to say that this issue has been resolved, but it does give me cause for concern, particularly in and around the scamming and fraud side of things. Could we get an update from the department in relation to any of these type issues? I suppose even there's a data protection issue there as well. So would it be possible if we could raise that, please?
Yeah, I raised that under Chair's business earlier in the meeting. I think maybe you just weren't in at the time. So yeah, we'll do that. No problem, Claire.
We follow up on that, Chair. What occurs to me, sorry.
Please go ahead.
What occurs to me is it might be useful actually as part of our DALA readout to ask for the latest update on take-up, issues that have arisen, etc., because there's been long enough now with enough verifications and acceptances for glitches to be thrown up in the system. So it would just be helpful to know what those are. So we'll include that, Chair, in the DALA readout.
Thank you.
Chair, just briefly again on the broad issue of the High Street Voucher scheme. We were initially told that a lot of the success of this type of scheme in terms of stimulating the high street came from research that followed the Jersey experience. Having spoken to 2 elected representatives from the island in the last couple of weeks, while initially that would appear on the surface to be so, but the further delving into that is that it really is not and didn't achieve its full objective. It would be helpful if we could know what the department plans to do and how it rigorously intends to interrogate the value of that £147+ million, and indeed, presumably going forward, not probably in this mandate, but that this committee should subsequently do its own evaluation as well, because I think we're going to see a somewhat different story coming out of Jersey.
Chair, what I would flag up is we'll ask the department for its details on how it plans to assess the impact. But I would also imagine this size of spend and the fact that it will have been done under ministerial direction will automatically mean that the CNAG will look at it.
Yes.
So I would have thought, again, with that size of sum, that will be very high on its agenda. What I do is see, I'll talk to the PAC clerk to see if that's already in train in terms of timetabling. We'll bring back information on that, but I would very much expect that to be a high priority.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I'd heard the reports, Guernsey, as well. It's quite simple. If the cure to economic woes was to give everybody £100 to spend in the shop, then economists around the globe would be unemployed.
Yeah, take 20 quid off them as well.
And so it's just, you don't cure economic woes that simply. It just doesn't happen.
No.
Chair, just a point that you raised at the start regarding obviously the people using the duplicate national insurance number. Obviously that's a fraud issue. I assume if an individual's putting in someone else's number, they have their details. So it'd be interesting to know what the economy department is going to do with reporting that to police, because I presume it's not just a mistake that a person has put in the wrong digit. It's all the details incorrect. So it's obviously a fraud issue. So I don't know how, to be fair, the economy can, our economy department can pass it on to police, but they can't be responsible for somebody taking somebody else's details and going in front of them.
There'll be systems based, again, hopefully we'll get that back in the response around what issues
and numbers,
what they're doing. Yeah.
Quantity, should I say, yeah.
Thank you.
I think, Chair, can I just comment briefly? Certainly, I would just like to put on record, despite the negativity around this room about the card, certainly, to just reiterate the point, the appetite out there amongst the business community, hard-pressed traders, businesses, right across our town centres, as well as the public, to get these cards, there's certainly a very, very strong appetite for it, and it's not reflective of the concerns that are raised here. So I just want to put that on record, Chair, that there certainly is a great appetite for it to be rolled out, and people are certainly looking forward to it.
And one famous DJ, we'll call him a DJ because he's not a radio presenter, even applied for.
Yeah, no, I do. I think we all do recognise there is a desire for it, and there is an interest in it. But obviously, it is our role to scrutinise it fully as well. So that's what what we are doing. So moving on then to 6.3 at page 63 of our packs is a departmental response regarding a committee query about clarity on the contingency plans for assessments and vocational qualifications in the event of further lockdowns. The department states that the vocational contingency regulatory framework sets out the principles under which awarding organisations can make adaptations for 2021-22 that best suit their qualifications. Awarding organisations are currently communicating these adaptations with learning centres. So that's for members to note, and Peter, it might be useful if we could get the detail of that once it is communicated. So moving on then to item number 8, because we've already dealt with number 7 along with the parental bereavement leave bill number 5. So this is the small scale green energy bill. There is a copy of the bill and the explanatory financial memorandum at page 130. There's an extract from the Hansard of the second stage reading of the bill at page 143. A clerk's memos at page 11 of table papers. There's a draft bill timeline at page 15 of table papers. There is a motion to extend the committee stage of the bill at page 17 of table papers. The department's response to the committee request for views on the bill at page 18 of table papers. The small scale green energy bill was introduced on the 6th of July and passed second stage on the 28th of September, and it has now been referred to us for the committee stage. The committee has 30 working days to take evidence, consider and report its opinion on the bill, and the 30-day period for the bill ends on the 16th of November, which obviously accounts for Halloween recess, but obviously we're also dealing with the parental bereavement leave bill, and that will be finished up on the 15th. So we're advising that the committee seek an extension to the committee stage, and a motion requesting this must be considered in plenary before the end of the 30-day period. So given the limited time, the motion to extend the committee stage is being considered at today's meeting with an expected date for debate in plenary before Halloween recess. So the draft timeline is included in our packs, outlines the extension of the committee stage to the 28th of January. However, the committee will report before this date if it's possible that we can do so. So are members content with the draft timeline, and also can we seek agreement on the motion? Agreed. Which is that in accordance with Standing Order 33.4, the period referred to in Standing Order 33.2 be extended to the 28th of January in relation to the committee stage of the small scale green energy bill. So our members...
I don't know if I have to declare an interest or not.
No, the way this works is you are, obviously we know it's your bill, and therefore there's no requirement to declare an interest, and when you are sitting in your normal chair, being a committee member, you're just a committee member. It's only when you move into witness mode that role changes. So the bill as yours is already on record, and that is sufficient statement of interest. Members just might wonder why the 28th of January seems like a really arbitrary date. That's as late as we're being advised we can push anything. So beyond that date, that there is much less guarantee that subsequent stages can be processed. So we've effectively taken this as late as we're being advised we can.
So tell me this, Peter, not in relation to this item, but for other private members' bills that we get, will the 28th be the cut-off?
That'll be as late as we're likely to be able to go, yeah.
So if we can complete the committee stage of this in advance of that, then we'll try to do so.
The advice would be the sooner the better, because we know there are other bills following on behind. And obviously as those become later and later, that margin of time will become less and less, and we may even get to the point where we're finding ourselves having to report within the 30 days, which is really, really not ideal. But that's just to clarify what that date is, and members will see it again for subsequent PMBs as they come.
Okay, so just confirming that we're content with the draft timeline and with that motion, and then to also ask members that they are content to write to our key stakeholder groups, which would be the utility regulator, Consumer Council, Sony, electricity providers, micro generator representatives, academics, and if anybody has any other ideas of people that we should write to, let Peter know. So the also to seek members' agreement to invite the bill sponsor to provide an oral briefing on the bill at next week's meeting if he's happy to do so.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on then to item number 9, which is the SR 2021-253 C10, the Employment Act NI 2016, Commencement number 4, Order NI 2021. There is the SR at page 183. There is a departmental response to committee queries at page 188. The committee considered the SL1 at its meeting on the 15th of September and wrote to the department for further information in relation to each aspect of the Employment Act which is being brought into operation. A response has now been provided at page 188, and we also asked ICTU for views and we haven't had those yet.
No, they haven't come back to us. Chair, just at this point, it might be worth flagging up in the round of the conversation that members had earlier with with Mark Huddleston from the Skills Advisory Group, that the department, part of the regulations being made will impact on careers advice, and it does give the department an increase in its powers to do more and potentially then make further changes. So I just want to get that into members' memory at the minute, because it is something that I think will probably be relevant as we get into the skills issues more and subsequent to the joint meeting with Education on the 20th. Members may well want to come back to that careers advice issue, but this SR as part of it will give the department a little bit more flexibility in what it can do.
So Peter, can we postpone this for another week to see if we get the response?
Well, the interesting thing about this one is it's already in place and there's no formal procedure. So we take the approach of using the same mechanisms as we would use on any SR, but technically
You don't have to do anything.
you don't have to do anything at all. But it's just for neatness sake and to get a committee view on record. But I think what I'd like to do, if members are content, is take that element around careers advice and potentially lift that out and see what more can be done.
Yeah.
To take it, I suppose, to its maximum interpretation, if members are content to do that.
Yep. Great.
And other than that, the SR is as it is. If members are content with it, or if not, continue to note.
Can we just wait another
just
week
leave
and
this,
see if we get
absolutely.
the response? Yeah, if members are happy enough to do that.
Okay.
So item number 10 then is correspondence. Page 192 of our pack, there's a copy of correspondence from the Assembly's EU Affairs Manager regarding the protection of critical infrastructure. The Chair of the European Scrutiny Committee in the House of Commons is requesting further information from the British Paymaster General on the impact of the proposed EU directive on critical national infrastructure in relation to the implementation of the single electricity market in the north and the application of related EU laws under the protocol. So that's to note, and I assume we'll get the response when that comes. Page 198 of our packs, there's a copy of correspondence from the Assembly's EU Affairs Manager regarding a draft EU Energy Taxation Directive. The Chair of the European Scrutiny Committee has written to the British Secretary to the Treasury on the draft EU Energy Taxation Directive, asking the government for more information on the potential applicability of new EU rules on energy taxation in the north and the impact this might have on households and businesses, and for here and for Britain too. So that again is for members to note. Then at page 203, there's a copy of the Department for Economy's input to the House of Lords Scrutiny report on the UK EEA EFTA trade agreement. The response states that there remain considerable complexities around how the North will fully benefit from Britain's free trade agreements, including the free trade agreement with Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway due to the protocol. So that's just for members to note. Then at page 206 there's correspondence from Amnesty International regarding a report on the appropriate state response to abuses in mother and baby homes, Magdalene laundries and workhouses in the north. And obviously the report was published in relation to that yesterday. Peter, I don't think there's anything we need to do with this.
We were copied in as an awareness, so we'll also then be copied in on any further correspondence or responses.
Okay, so if members are happy to note that for now. Then at page 246, there's a copy of Airport Operators Association quarterly update, so that's for members to note. At page 248, there's a copy of the Consumer Council's annual report and accounts for 2020-21. The CNAG has made no observations or matters raised on the financial statements, so that's for members to note. Then at page 21 of table papers, there's correspondence from the Committee on Procedures to all statutory committees regarding whether committees have experienced any particular challenges relating to LCM since its last consultation exercise. The Justice Committee has raised the issue of the time frame and notice periods for LCMs. So if the committee is content, the clerk would respond in similar terms. And I think, Peter, perhaps and members can reflect on this themselves, but it would also be maybe useful to reflect on the fact that there have been a number of requests for LCMs, and while that was understandable in the context of COVID and emergency initiatives, that it's not obviously something that we like as a matter of routine.
Chair, we can absolutely reflect that as the issue that arises where the Assembly is being asked to allow another legislature to legislate on issues that are delegated to it. So we'll add that into the response, Chair.
So moving on then to 10.8, page 23 of table papers, there's a copy of correspondence from the Clerk Assistant to the Chairperson's Liaisons Group, highlighting the current pressures that committees, members and committee staff are facing in the period up to the end of the mandate in March 2022, in particular those committees with multiple bills, which is us. The memo highlights that the committees reporting on the committee stage of bills beyond late January will present considerable challenges to their prospects of proceeding to final stage prior to the end of the mandate. And this bill highlights that this committee could have up to 8 bills, and that includes the parental bereavement leave and pay bill that we're dealing with, and John's bill, and others that we are expecting. So that's just for members to note, and obviously something we'll keep under review. At page 28 of table papers then, there is a copy of the Belfast Business Sustainability Survey from Belfast Chamber, and that's for members to note for now. So that brings us on to item number 11, which is any other business, and at this point none has been indicated. Okay. So item number 12 then is the date, time and place of the next meeting, which will be next Wednesday morning at 10 AM in this room. And there is an informal meeting tomorrow morning at 11 via Teams with the Chief Executives of the local airports, including the new Chief Executive of Belfast City Airport.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so that's it for now.
Thank you. Thank you.
30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.